How's everyone doing this morning? Who's excited? All right, that's awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you, Maggie, for that awesome introduction. So my father's father, Edward was his name. He actually had a dream, which was to give his family a better life. And he grew up in the West End of Boston and grew up in hardship. His father was an alcoholic, worked 3 jobs, and served in the Korean War, came back, and his dream was for his children to have a better life. And that dream was realized when my father was the first in the family to graduate from college. And my father wanted to, he really loved ecology and learning about the living world. And at one point, he realized that wasn't enough, that just using his intellect wasn't enough, and that he actually wanted to make a difference, and he wanted to use his heart as well. And so his vision was to make a difference in the lives of kids around the world, and he's now moved on to do some really important work with international nutrition. And so I've been inspired by my dad's story and thinking, how am I going to, what's my role going to be in this world? So I was always curious as a kid. I would lie awake at night wondering just why is there poverty? Why is there war? I remember one night imagining that I had a friend, Marco, in elementary school. His name was Marco. He's from Bolivia. And I imagined, what would it be like if we ever found that our nations were at war, and we encountered each other on a battlefield? What would that be like? And I imagined that we would see each other, and we would recognize each other. We hadn't seen each other in maybe 15, 20 years, and we would just realize how stupid war was, and we would put down our weapons, and we would hug each other. And that's how I imagined what would happen. So I went into the world wondering how to take these values into my life, how to bring people together, how to make the world a better place. When I was in college, I really wanted to understand why. Why is the world the way it is? So I traveled around New York State learning about migrant farm workers and the injustices they face and lack of pay, poor working conditions. I learned traveling in Brooklyn and working in Brooklyn for a summer at a community organizing agency in low-income African-American, Hasidic American, Caribbean American housing projects. And I learned that injustice is there too. I lived on a farm in Costa Rica for a summer. It was a pineapple farm, and I learned that all of the pineapple that was being grown was shipped to the United States for export, and what used to be on that farm was a rainforest. In fact, 90% of the rainforest in the village where I was had been cut down so they can create these export farms. So when I graduated from school, like many of you will, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had so much energy and excitement, and because of my experiences, I thought that because I wanted to make a difference in a community somewhere, that I would join the Peace Corps. And I was all set to go. I met with the recruiter until one fateful night in the Brookendale Community Center in Caroline, when the deputy town supervisor of Ed Cope, his name was Ed Cope, came up to me and said, "Hey, Dominic, you can't leave. Your community needs you here. Would you consider running for town council?" And how many people have ever thought of running for office? Raise your hand. Okay, a few. Excellent. Well, like the vast majority of the rest of you, I was like, absolutely not. No way. Why would I ever want to do that? That's something adults do. That's not for me. But then when I thought about it, I realized that maybe I can choose to pursue that aspiration I had as a child, not overseas in another country, but maybe I can build community, bring people together, make a difference, be a change agent right in my hometown in rural upstate New York. And so I chose to stay. And ended up knocking on hundreds of doors, going around talking with hundreds of people, and out of 4 people running, ended up being the highest vote getter and was elected to office at the age of 22. And since then, I've learned that my story is actually just one of many stories in this room. from Zach Berger, who came here to the, you know his story, he came here, he saw a bunch of adults talking about climate change, and he was like, what? You're talking about climate change, but that's going to be my future that's my future you're talking about. We as young people need a voice. And so he chose to work with the Wild Center, and now you're all here living in his in the legacy of that choice that he made at that one moment. Louise, who is the sustainability director, and decided it's not enough just for her to work on campus. She has to actually build this clean energy economy and build this local food economy, and so started her own farm. And her vision is now to provide food for her community. And in the back, Chris, whose brother came here before and told stories, and he was so excited to come here that he's here now, and he went to the environmental club and went to every single meeting, and now wants to take what he's learning here and bring it back to the school to work with Michael on composting and to make some really cool things happen. And so all of our stories, each of us here is on a hero's journey that led us here today. And together, all of our stories are part of a larger story of a generation coming of age at the start of the 21st century. We're the largest generation in history. Half the world is under age 25. And we're the most open-minded generation in history, the most tolerant, the most traveled, the most mobile, technologically savvy, and interconnected generation in history. And I'm so grateful to be alive at this time when we have such a rich and diverse, abundant, and majestic world. But we all know that we're waking up at a critical moment, at converging crises, ecological, cultural, socio-political, spiritual crises. In fact, it's been said that we are the middle children of history, coming of age at the crossroads of civilization, a generation rising between an old world dying and a new world being born. We are the make it or break it generation, the all or nothing generation, the crucible through which civilization will pass or crash. That was Joshua Gorman, who founded an organization called Generation Waking Up. So that brings us to this present moment. Oh, yeah. So that brings us to this present moment where we see that our consequences, for the first time in human history, are extending beyond just our own lives or even 200 years, but even into geological time. And what we do now will determine quality of life on this planet for millennia and possibly millions of years to come. No pressure. Okay. All right, so now we need to know, but in order to make the world a better place and to take action, we need to know where we are now. And so you're all here because of our changing climate. And you all know this, but our climate change, this is not new. We've known about it for decades. And just shout out, what are some of the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing? So that I can hear you. Glaciers are melting. Sea levels are rising. Crazy weather, increased rainfall. Windstorms. Drought, epic drought, unprecedented drought. 12% of the U.S. is in exceptional drought, the highest classification that there is. We're also seeing bleaching coral reefs, and we're seeing worsening storms, unprecedented flooding, and it appears to be accelerating as well. We used to think 20 years ago that climate change, or even 5-10 years ago, climate change was a grave but distant threat. We didn't have to worry about it with some remote future. But it's arrived 100 years ahead of schedule, and that we will be facing the impacts in our lives throughout our lifetime. Well, why? Why is this? Well, fundamentally, it's because of the science that we used to think that the atmosphere was so vast and huge, but actually it's so thin. And we're easily able to tip it out of balance by changing the chemical makeup. we think of it as this huge, vast thing, but actually you can fit 266 atmospheres in the ocean. The ocean is 266 times larger than the atmosphere, and we already know that we're changing the chemical composition of the ocean. I know, it's crazy. So it shouldn't surprise us that we can easily change the chemical composition of our atmosphere. Okay, this is the most, how many people have seen this graph? Maybe 10% of people. Okay, this is the most important graph you will ever see in your entire life. Get ready. All right, so on the top you see CO2 concentrations going up and down. The time scale is 0 over on the right to 400,000 years over where I'm on the left. And on the bottom you'll see temperature going up and down. So when it's down, that's an ice age. When it's up, that's an interglacial period. So what are some things that you notice about this graph? Temperature follows CO2. They're highly related or correlated. What else? There's a sequence. It's a cycle. It's a kind of a regular pattern. Cool. What else? Yep. Yeah, one interesting thing to know is that the blue graph on the bottom, that it takes a while, actually. It's kind of slow for it to go down to that glacial period, but when it goes from glacial to the warm interglacial, it just shoots right up. It melts really quickly is one way to think about it. Other things to notice, that there are certain tipping points, perhaps, when it gets to the bottom. All of a sudden, something rapid changes in it, and it travels back up. It's non-linear is the term. It's not smooth. It changes rapidly and unexpectedly. Another thing to notice is the CO2 level, the top one. Notice how it's never gone above 300 parts per million. That's parts per million carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere for the last 400,000 years. In fact, it's been that way for several 100,000 years beyond that. Another thing to notice, and this is the kicker, down at the very end of the blue graph, you'll see it kind of levels off a little bit. Do you see that? The time scale of that is 10,000 years. What happened in the last 10,000 years? Who can say? Civilization. Farming. Agriculture. The end of the last ice age. So, basically all of human history happened within that amount, in that tiny little span. And isn't that amazing that the only time in this whole graph where it was actually level, the temperature was level, where the seas were stable, or the temperatures were stable, was just in the last 10,000 years. And that just happened to be where we weren't having to chase back and forth, or running away from glaciers, or we could settle on the edges of lakes and oceans without having to move back and forth. That's how agriculture developed. That's when our cities developed. All of human history was contained, and human civilization was made possible by that stable climate. So when we're talking about our changing climate affecting civilization, this is why we're talking about. Okay, so never before has it gone above 300 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. That was before the Industrial Revolution. Does anyone know where we are now? That's right, 392 and rising fast. It's higher than it's ever been in the last 2 million years. But do you know where we will be with another 40 years of burning carbon dioxide, or burning fossil fuels and releasing CO2 in the atmosphere? Where we will be? By the way, this is your and my lifetime. 770 parts per million, even with a 15% global cut in emissions. 770 parts per 770 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. The last time there was that was 33.9 million years ago at the end of the Eocene, when there was no Antarctic ice sheet on the planet. Whew. So, the next few years actually will determine the quality of human life on this planet for several millennia, perhaps several million years. They found that carbon emissions are essentially irreversible on a human timescale. And even if we were to cut emissions to zero today, that we will already have some changing climate built into the pipeline. And we know that the impacts. The ice actually started melting at 300 parts per billion, and the coral reef started bleaching at 320. So we're already well along in this process. But it gets even more fun than that. Climate change is not the only challenge that we're facing based on our fossil fuel economy. In fact, we face many challenges. What are some other challenges that we face? Supplies of fossil fuels. What else? The cost. What are some other crises that we're facing on this, challenges that we're facing at this time? Mass extinction, so ecological crisis. Right, quality of life and technological advancements. We're also seeing an increase in human population, exponential increase in human population, so demographic challenges as well. Water challenges is huge. Food security is another big one. Out of all of them, though, I want to focus right now for our conversation on what was said about energy crisis, which is peak oil. So this is a fun one. So this is what happened 150 years ago when someone stuck a pipe in the ground in Pennsylvania. This black stuff just came shooting out oil, and we figured out that it contained so much energy that we could build our entire industrial society on that. However, in the last 150 years, we've poked all the holes of the easily available oil, and now we're moving on to harder and harder, so much so that we now have to build. I learned that this oil platform cost $1.2 billion to build, drilling 2 miles underneath the ocean. There is no way we would go through this expense of building this kind of oil platform if we could still stick a pipe in the ground and get easily available oil. We've used up all the easily available fossil fuels. For scale, that's a person. And we know that as we are going to ever more extreme methods of extraction, that there can be consequences. This is the Gulf Coast Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And we're seeing this even affecting upstate New York. This is right across the border in Pennsylvania, a hydraulic fracking rig, and we're seeing the consequences of having to go to extreme methods to satisfy our society's need for cheap energy. Basically, here would be a oil production curve if you map it out, and it appears that we're right potentially on the peak of a steep energy decline. Why does that matter? Well, when you map it on a human or on a historic timescale, you see how just a quick blip that it was. And, well, why should we be worried? Well, if you map human population on it, perhaps we've been able to support a population like that because of subsidized fossil fuel agriculture. All right, so how many people are cheered up at this point? Okay, good. But seriously, I think it's important for us to really take this in and to feel the pain that we feel when we hear this, especially with those other crises, ecological crises, when you learn that 50% of all species of life on Earth may be extinct within our lifetimes. I think it's important for us to take in that pain and to feel it. And for me, it shows up as being afraid, as being angry. How could our parents have done this? Feeling overwhelmed. What can we possibly do? And being afraid of what I may see in my lifetime. No generation has ever had to face this before, but we may actually be able to learn from previous generations that have had to face the prospect of nuclear devastation that might erase them from the planet. They also felt, and many in this room remember feeling the despair that came when you imagine the possibility that you might not be able to have children. So we can learn from that, and we can actually, there's been teachings out of that pain is our greatest teacher, that our suffering is not just our own suffering, but it's the suffering of the whole world. When we see clear-cut forests, when we see kids who could have had a good shot at life being thrown in jail in inner cities, when we see children losing parents, coral reefs bleaching, that's That's our pain. When we feel the anger, the sadness, the emptiness inside, that's the earth expressing itself through us, and we can own that. If we face reality with clear eyes and an open heart, we can realize that we're not alone. You actually, despite knowing all of these things deep in your experience, you know all of this, you still showed up today. Look around you, in fact. See these amazing people sitting next to you that were born into the same critical moment that you were. And across the entire planet, there are young people coming of age at this crazy, crazy time with the same questions that you face of, what does this mean for my life? What am I going to do next? And that the possibility that every person sitting next to you will play a role in the healing of our world, and that we need each other, and that we will lead our world, our generation will lead the world through this time. And I am so grateful to be with all of you on this amazing hero's journey. So before we move forward again, we have to know how we got here and to see things with new eyes. So we know that we are experiencing one of the greatest injustices, the greatest of injustices, where we are actively destroying the ecological foundations upon which civilization depends with the full knowledge that we're doing so. And why is that happening? Well, fundamentally, it's happening because we have had core assumptions that are incorrect. What are some of those assumptions that have led us to where we are today? That's a question. Yeah, it's, the impacts of our actions are not, they're distant. They're not now. What else? There's no such thing as our ability to change the world. We're not interconnected with the world. What else?
Mentioning climate change.
Right. Oh, if we ignore it, it will just go away. That's a good one. One person can't make a difference. The core assumptions of everything that our modern society is built on is actually that there are no limits, that we can keep doing whatever we want, and that there will not be consequences to our actions. And that, fundamentally, all of everything that we're seeing right now comes from a fundamental assumption that we are separate, that we're separate from the world, that we're separate from each other. And that's actually, science is bearing out that that's actually just not true, that we're deeply connected all the way from literally coming from a single point. Everything you see around you in the world all the people around you came from a single point. So if you ever don't know anyone, say, hey, I think I know you. Did we spend 15 billion years together as a singularity back before the Big Bang? That'd be great. That our bodies, that 90% of the DNA in our bodies is actually not human DNA. That the Earth self-regulates to keep optimum conditions for life. It behaves as if it's an organism and if it's alive. Nature itself likes balance and dynamic stability. We used to think that competition was the way that nature worked, and that's not true at all. Actually, species work together through cooperation and to seek balance. The trees create seeds that the squirrel eats, and then their poops it out, and then the trees take it in again as nutrients. Everything's a cycle. And to live on this planet, all species have to play by those rules. But that's not how our economy works at all, right? How many people have seen The Lord of the Rings? Right? Yeah. So you remember the scene where it's like this down in the cave and they're digging stuff out, like this ancient stuff that they're pulling out of the ground. There's fire and brimstone. That's basically how our economy works, actually. But it doesn't have to be that way. Indigenous cultures have, especially here in upstate New York, the Haudenosaunee and the Finger Lakes region, had this concept. They understood that the impacts of their actions extend down to 7 generations in the future, and in every deliberation they must keep that in mind. So we can do the same things. We have to view ourselves as a partner species in the community of life. So as we're building now, it's realizing that we can step forward. What is this new exciting future that we're going to be building together? What's it look like on the ground? What's it taste like, feel like? What are the colors? What are the images that you see? What's happening in your community already? What's emerging? Sharing. Smaller. We're coming back to maybe a local community. What are we seeing in that local community starting to pop up? Thrift. People are actually reusing things.
Local food movement.
We're actually starting to grow our own food again. Amazing. A cycle. We're reusing resources. The local economy is actually a cycle where instead of sending our money overseas paying for oil, we're actually retrofitting our homes for energy efficiency, creating local jobs. What else? Okay, awesome. You got it. We're building all these exciting, amazing things are starting to pop up and emerge as a natural response to everything that we've seen so far. So really, we have a choice. And that choice, each of us face this every day, is so we can either let all of this overwhelm us and use that as an excuse to do nothing, or we can see that we are part of the largest transition and change in human history. So, okay, great. Well, what do we do? Well, do what moves you. People are like, oh, well, how do I start? Well, find what motivates you. For me, it's about fairness and justice, that it's unfair that one generation can take away the ability of future generations to meet their needs. We're the ones inheriting this crisis. We're the ones paying for it, and it's deeply unfair that the young people and the most vulnerable around our world are the ones going to face the impacts the most. Who here ever feels overwhelmed, by the way? Okay, look around you. Know that you're not alone and that your experience is being shared. In fact, I know you. I know each of you. You're the ones that get upset when you see someone getting bullied on the schoolyard. You're the ones that get upset when you see clear-cut forests. You feel that wrenching feeling in your own gut. Use that strength of yours to allow the earth to express through you what needs to happen. And if you don't express that, if you let it bottled up and you don't act on that and get that energy out there, it's going to stay there inside of you. And it won't go away until you do. Okay, cool. One thing that I really like that's emerging at this time is the Occupy Wall Street movement, where just spontaneously people are coming together and being like, you know what? We actually want to take our future back. We want to take our country back. Let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Bam. And they just, all of a sudden, it sparked this nationwide movement. One thing I think is important to talk about, ignore that. So my story, in 2007, I was at my job, right? And I'm reading about the Arctic ice caps back in 2100, there might not be an Arctic ice cap. And I'm like, what? How's that possible? And I learned that even if we went to 100% energy independence in my community, that we'd still get run over by climate change. So when I heard about the UN climate negotiations, that they would be deciding the future of the Kyoto Protocol at this place called Bali, I knew I just had to go. And so I went. And there were these young people. I saw young people from all around the world that cared about climate change, cared about building a better future. That at this, from every language and culture, at this one event, we all got together from all around the world. And people would stand up and share what they're doing in each other's countries. So people would say, well, we're holding a youth power summit in the Adirondacks, and then another country, the UK, would be like, well, we met with half of members of parliament. And then the Australians stood up and they're like, oh yeah, well, we actually went into a coal plant and shut it down last month. And you're like, what? That's awesome. And then at the end of all of that, a woman stood up in the back. Her name was Claire. You can kind of see her. And she stood up and she said, my name's Claire, and I'm from the island Kiribati in the Pacific. And my island is just 1.5 meters above sea level. And we are already seeing the oceans rise and our beaches eroding. And my family and I, we are so afraid, and we don't know what we're going to do. We feel so alone. And she said, seeing all of you and hearing what you're doing, this is the first time that I felt not alone and that somebody cares. And everybody in the room started crying as we realized that we are here for something much, much larger than ourselves. And this was at the youth speech where another Australian is calling out the country delegates that are blocking progress. At the end, Bamboo is standing right to the right there, 8 years old. She stood up and read a poem that said, I'm simply here because I'm afraid my world will die. and the South African delegates were crying, and the German delegates were crying, and we realized that we as young people have the power to influence what is happening on around us. So I came back and got together with some citizens in Caroline, and we're like, what's the craziest thing we could do? Well, what if we deliver one energy-saving light bulb to every single household in the town of Caroline in a single day? No way. That will never happen. That's impossible. And then we got funded, and we're like, oh, no, we actually have to do this. So we organized 100 volunteers. It was a small team, very small team. 100 volunteers went door to door and delivered one CFL in a bag to every single household in the town of Caroline across 55 square miles in 3 hours. The largest event of its kind in upstate New York history. And that has now spawned, talking about consequences of actions, that has now spawned, that was Lighten Up Caroline, it spawned Lighten Up Tompkins across 6 towns, and then Lighten Up Ithaca, which literally last week distributed 12,000 CFLs, one to almost every household in the city of Ithaca, calculating that if every household uses the bulb that we gave them, we would save Ithaca over $250,000 in energy savings, now recirculating in the local economy. That's what one small action can do when it sends its ripple effects out. Social change can be unexpected, and very small groups can have a huge impact. Did you know that actually only 3% of the population actively participated in the civil rights movement? Only 3%. And it had this huge impact that swept the nation. So one of my favorite stories is this small group of people in D.C. and from actually around the country, young people, were like, you know what, we really have to do something on climate change. Let's have a summit right when the first 100 days of the Obama administration. And so they started calling their friends, and those friends started calling people, and the 5 grew to 50, which grew to 500. And pretty soon, they're expecting to have 5,000 people show up at PowerShift. How many people have gone to PowerShift in DC? I highly, highly recommend it if you are able to go to the next one. It's every 2 years or so. So they wanted 5,000 people to show up to call for climate change and clean energy, and guess what happened? 12,000 young people from around the country and the world showed up on the steps of the Capitol building. They didn't even know what to do. We organized 200 people from Tompkins County to go down. We were the second largest delegation in the nation. And it was just amazing. Young people coming together, expressing our voices, showing up in a big way on the national scene. And we actually marched around the coal plant the dirty coal plant that powers the U.S. Capitol building, and we shut it down for a day. Pretty amazing. Even before we got there, Nancy Pelosi announced that she was going to switch the fuel from coal to gas. Pretty cool. The 350, how many people have heard of 350, of course? Yes, great. Again, the largest day of international political action in history, 5,200 actions in 181 countries, led by young people. It was even bigger in Copenhagen. There's the International Day of Action. Look at those cute kids. It was even larger in Copenhagen, where the UN climate negotiations in 2009, 100,000 people marched, delivering the largest petition ever in the history of the world to government leaders, 15.2 million signatures. Young people started getting arrested because they say, no longer, this is my future on the line, and I cannot allow this to continue. And there were people that were fasting there, including Anna Keenan, who you saw pointing at the Bali climate negotiations. She chose, I can't let this happen anymore, I'm going to fast. And she fasted for 40 days, and it inspired thousands of people around the world to join her, myself included, for a day. Really amazing. So really, okay, great. You're all like, okay, that's all nice and good, but what do? I can't, jump on a plane and go to the UN climate negotiations. Well, you could try getting in someone's luggage. Well, how about try doing what you can with what you have, where you are? And we've already learned in what I've said here that one action, just one action taken with clear intention, can send ripple effects out that can literally change the world. We need to shoot for big dreams and big goals, and because that's what gets people excited. In fact, 99% of people are convinced that they are incapable of doing great things. And actually, that's exactly what Halliburton and ExxonMobil want you to think. That they want us to feel despair and to not do anything. They want us not to care. In fact, while I was at Cancun, Bill McKibben, at a panel discussion I was with, said, actually, this is about the 10 largest corporations on the planet in the history of the world are energy. Of the 10, 7 are energy companies, and the 8th is GE. And they spend tens of millions of dollars on propaganda for the public each year, and you probably see it on TV, manipulating public opinion. They have 4 lobbyists for every single member of Congress, and they don't have to pay for climate change. We do. They are profiting at our expense, and that's deeply unfair. And Bill McKibben said, and I quote here, actually what this boils down to is about everyday grassroots people mobilizing themselves against the dirty multinational energy corporations that just want to keep a good thing going for themselves for a few more years. So that's what it comes down to, really people who care. Okay. Where are we? Okay, I wanted to tell a story. Just ending really with a story, which was, what can you do in your hometown? Well, in Caroline, we're an agricultural community. For 200 years, we've grown our own food. We had mills powered by the waters of 6 Mile Creek. But over time, our town has changed, and farmers are, like many communities here, farmers are having a harder time making a living. Kids are moving out to bigger cities. But at the same time, we're seeing folks moving in and actually have off-the-grid homes with advanced solar panels and wind technologies. So in that context, 4 years ago, I was riding my bike home and I saw these orange flags on the side of the road. I'm like, I wonder what that's about. The answer came later that week when I was riding my bike to a council meeting and saw on the road, I was shocked that there were these caravan of giant, white, shiny, unmarked trucks, huge trucks in a caravan driving on the side of the road. I'm like, what is going on? My first reaction was, this looks like a multinational corporate invasion of my town. What the heck are they doing here? And the answer, some of them had this round disc on the bottom, and I figured out that they were probably doing some kind of seismic testing. And I was like, why are they doing that? The answer came a year later in the mail in the form of gas leases that were getting mailed to all of our community. And pretty soon, before we knew it, people said that we learned that 55% of the land was leased for gas drilling. And we're like, okay, maybe that could be cool. But then we started hearing stories about this new high volume slick water hydraulic fracturing, and then these horror stories of in other communities where you could set your water on fire and there was contamination and cows were dying, and we're like, what? This is going to come? No way. And people just started getting really, really afraid. And in fact, they then published research from Cornell University came out that said, although they call it a clean transition fuel, natural gas, a methane gas, a clean transition fuel, is with 60% cleaner burning. It actually, if you take into account the whole life cycle of all the trucks and the leaks, because methane is 100 times more powerful than CO2, it's actually greater than or equal to the carbon emissions of coal. And so we're like, people started despairing, like there's nothing that we could do. We were told that towns can't do anything about it. And literally 5 people in Caroline stood up and said, you know what? No, we are not going to allow this activity in our community. We can do something about it. And they started organizing 40 volunteers to go door to door to every single house in Caroline multiple times, and they got 1,147 signatures on a petition, which was over half of all the registered voters in the town of Caroline. It was the largest petition in the history of Caroline, and they presented it to the town council. The town council, unfortunately, 3 of the members on there chose not to do anything about it. They just wanted to wait and see. They didn't want to lead. And so they started going back out to door to mobilizing people, and literally on Tuesday, we elected an entire new town board in Caroline 2-1. Victory 2-1 because people in Caroline wanted to stand up for a clean energy future and not a dirty energy future. And that started with 5 people saying, you know what, not in my town. The line is drawn here. We're going to start building that clean energy economy, starting in our own hometowns and our own backyards. Yeah. So really the key is to take an action, take any action, take small steps, get support, reach out to your buddies, celebrate every accomplishment that you have. Leverage your strengths. Don't try spending lots of time on making yourself better, waiting until you're like a perfect person to save the world. No. Start now, work on your strengths. And youth is our strength. People under 25 are the most powerful force on this planet. We just look at Egypt and what's happened by toppling a despot that's been there for decades, just by being in the streets, young people coming together, leveraging their strengths. 3 things: hold actions, create new structures, and shift in consciousness. If we can do all of those things, we can ignite a movement. Just last week, our movement is creating this space for the world that we want to see brought into being. Just last week, I went down to D.C. and joined an action where we were joining hand in hand around the White House, where to stop a pipeline that would take dirty, damaging coal from Alberta, Canada, literally through America's heartland to the Gulf Coast to process more oil, when we already know what the consequences of that will be. And people all along the route of that pipeline are saying, you know what? No, not in my backyard. This is not okay. And it's actually an international movement because people in Canada, First Peoples nations here in the U.S., and environmentalists and activists here are joining together, saying we don't want this carbon bomb anymore. And so we joined around linking hands around the White House. I was expecting just to be, one person deep. There were 5 people deep all the way around the White House, completely surrounding it, sending a powerful message to Obama. Yeah, you better listen to this emerging movement that's happening here. Through our actions, we can set in motion powerful things. I'm going to end with one story, and that's Felix Finkbeiner. Who has heard of Felix Finkbeiner? Okay, so Felix, he grew up in Germany. He's 12 years old, and when he first learned about climate change on a book report, his teacher said, okay, go home, learn about climate change, come back and give a book report. He's reading about climate change, just like, oh my goodness, this is, we have to do something. So he's standing up there giving his book report to the class, and he just kind of spontaneously, this courage comes up, and he's like, we should plant 1 million trees. And they're all like, okay. Yeah, sure, that's nice. But they form a club, and they started getting people around it, and they started actually planting trees in their local area, and then starting clubs at other schools. Again, 12 years old, other schools, and they start training people. They start having nationwide trainings coming in from all around the country. And just this past year, they planted their 1 millionth tree. And I was at the UN climate negotiations in Cancun in Mexico, and where in Carmen del Playa, which is a city right on the sea, I had the opportunity to see him, now 14 years old, talking with the equivalent of our Boy and Girl Scouts, who were ranged in age from 3 years old, so adorable in their little costumes, all the way to graduating seniors from high school. And he was talking about how if we don't take action on climate change, everything that you see here will be underwater. Your parents' homes will be underwater. We have to do something, and that starts with us as young people taking our own future into our own hands. And he asked, so this is all through a translator, and he asked, will you join me and plant 1 million trees in your country too? And they all kind of talked with each other. And then with one voice they said, yes, we will do that. We choose to do that. And the incredible thing is he's traveled all around the world, and now 81 other countries, their young people have signed on to planting 1 million trees each. That started with one person and one 12-year-old in a creative, courageous moment in his classroom, with a clear intention, sending ripple effects out that are literally changing this world. So imagine if one 12-year-old can plant 81 1 million trees, what we are all collectively capable of doing. Thank you so much. I believe in you. We're going to do this together. I trust you so much. Thank you.